All right. Hello, LinkedIn and YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us live today. We have two special guests back from Pomerol Partners, and we're going to talk about the Qlik Sense Writeback Extension. So if you're using Qlik or have used Qlik or want to use Qlik, chances are you might have needed to write data back to your Qlik Sense application. So I'm actually going to go ahead and bring in our guests. We've got Fred Hefer and Goncalo Pereira here joining us live. Hello, guys. How are you?
Doing well, Kate. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So I know, Goncalo, you're joining from Portugal, and Fred, are you in Kansas?
I'm in Kansas. Yes, that's correct.
And I'm in New York. Look at this magic. We're from all over the world, and we're here together to talk about a really fun topic, Qlik Sense Writeback Extension. So let's go ahead and get started with some introduction. So for those that are not familiar with you guys, Fred, Goncalo, and Pomerol Partners, maybe do a brief introduction.
Okay, we'll do. I'll quickly start just with an introduction to Pomerol Partners, and then I'll let Goncalo introduce himself, and I'll take the intro from there. But yeah, Pomerol Partners, we're a Qlik partner. We're an elite solution provider, and what that essentially means is we're an implementation and value-added resales partner of Qlik. In addition, we're also a trusted extension developer. So that just means any of the extensions that we develop are independently reviewed, validated, and accredited by Qlik. So they are compatible with current and previous Qlik Sense versions, and that's quite important from a support perspective for our prospects and our clients. In terms of myself, Fred Hefer, I'm one of the co-founders. I'm currently the executive of the US operations, and I'm leading the commercial side of our writeback product.
Yeah. So let me first of all say afternoon, everyone. Afternoon, Kate, for you and Fred. Since
morning.
Morning there.
Morning.
Yeah, morning to you all. So about myself, my name is Goncalo Pereira. Exactly, I'm actually calling from Portugal. So in terms of Pomerol, I'm the technical lead in our UK office, and basically I'm responsible by all the technical decisions or all the technical deliveries to our customers, everything around deployment, the infrastructure, the proper development in terms of the data, and also including, in this case, the writeback, the implementation, what is going to be the future, what is actually the present, and also sometimes, or the majority of the times, actually doing the proper development as well. So I actually have, before actually entering the world of BI, I actually started as a proper developer. Mm-hmm. So JavaScript, C#, and lots of other technologies. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to have you both here today. I think before we get into further questions and addressing questions from the audience, let's just set the ground base here. What is the Qlik Sense Writeback Extension? How is it used? What is it for?
All right, so I'll take a shot on that. But I mean, at a very high level, Kate, it captures data points in live Qlik Sense applications, and it stores the information to a secure data source. I think the aspect of capturing information in a live setting is important, because you generally derive insights, or you find something in your dashboards, and in enabling the user to stay in that setting, that user experience, it keeps them engaged. They don't have to flip to a CRM system or ERP system to update data points. They don't have to go to a spreadsheet and update data there. And more importantly, they don't have to rely on an Excel spreadsheet as a production data source. So when we capture these comments, we pass the information through an API to a robust data source, whether that's SQL or Postgres, and that becomes the production data source for the collected data points. But yeah, that's my take on it. Goncalo, anything to add?
Yeah, at the end, one of the things that I would say is the writeback can be definitely an add-on to the Qlik environment, to make sure, like Fred said, that the user actually be able to stay in that environment without having the need to go to somewhere else to try to, let's say, create some Excel or something like that. But at the end, is one of the things that is also important to say is we are giving capabilities of writing back to a database, but is not a replacer of your transactional system. So it's more in terms of a value add-on to your current environment at the end.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's very helpful. We did get a comment here asking for a demo from Koja. So Koja, we will get to it in just a couple minutes. So definitely stick around. Gonzalo is gonna go ahead and show us a nice demo of how this is going to work. But I wanted to ask, how did you guys come up with this idea? I mean, I know that there is definitely a need for this because I've seen this when I was using business intelligence tools of my own, and it wasn't Qlik. I think it was Tableau and Power BI, and I needed to write something back. And we're like, yeah, you just simply can't do that. And it looks like now we can. So how did this come about?
Kate, it was good fortune. I mean, we were working with a US investment bank. We were trying to do some consulting engagements for them, but this was a very progressive contact with regards to analytics, and this was at the time where integrating APIs was quite new. And we discussed ways, how can we work with you guys? And I think one of the topics diverted to API, and we started talking about, how can we deploy something practical of value? And that got us started, talking about the writeback. The client or the contact themselves, they said, listen, I know this is uncharted territory for you guys. This is uncharted territory for us. So let's do this on a beta development practice. So essentially, I mean, you guys go ahead, develop the code. We'll deploy it in our complex environment, multi-node environment, lots of users. So you guys will be fire tested from day one. And this was almost 3 years ago. So I mean, so we went from limited, i.e., very, 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 very limited knowledge on how to use the writeback, to developing the code, testing it in UAT, getting it into production, and really getting it wrong a lot of the times, because that's how you really learn and build a more robust product, because dealing with the complexities of such an environment, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into the back end with regards to dealing with user concurrency, failovers. What happens if this happens? What if the user clicks right back at the same time? And how did I pull the information back? But yeah, that's how we got started. A very friendly beta client, and also a very challenging client that said, listen, okay, we might want to start with this use case. Yeah. And their initial use case was CRM. So they were migrating to a new CRM system, and part of the requirements was really identifying and prioritizing the data points that they needed to get into that new CRM system. So they said, listen, why don't we go to the users directly and say, listen, what data points do we need to have in there? That's how we started, and then we pivoted to actually getting output from machine learning models. So they used their data science team generated cross-sales opportunities. That went to the front office. But we then used the writeback to validate whether that cross-sales opportunity was accurate or not. And based on the feedback, that created a loop back to the data science teams and their models, and they started to retrain their models to be more accurate. But it was based on that data entry point saying yes or no, this is accurate or not. And they were able to refine it. But yeah, that's in brief how we got started. But yeah, there's a lot more use cases out there. But yeah, that's it in short.
Okay, yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's always interesting to know how these things come about. There's always a cool story behind these innovative products. And I know you touched on, one of the use cases there where we actually built the extension. But can you guys share a couple of more areas, industries, companies, or other use cases where this would be a good fit? I'm sure any company in any industry that's using data and using Qlik Sense to build dashboards and view their data, it could be useful for them. But do you have any in mind that are just really cool use cases that you want to share?
Yeah, cool is a relative term, but I'll go through some.
This is cool stuff, man.
Yeah. No, but our writeback is really it's different in terms of a lot of the solutions that are out there in the market currently. And the main differentiation point is ours is a pop-up driven user experience. So we try to balance the need of getting the right real estate on the analytics dashboard. And when a user needs to make an update, they click a button. a pop-up appears, and that really focuses the user experience around specific data points that they need to enter. I think what you'll see is a lot of the other extensions that are out there on the market are very tabular in nature. So it'll occupy a lot of the screen real estate. There'll be a big table in the middle, and that mimics the Microsoft Excel experience. Those solutions work very well in finance use cases where people consume spreadsheets on a daily basis. But we've found that the pop-up really works well within operations. So I spoke a little bit about CRM and sales operations, but some of the other use cases we've seen, have gone to the middle office. So being able to facilitate reconciliations by doing trade matching, that works really well. So you've got one trade coming in from one system, the hedge or the offsetting trade coming in from another system. And dealing with the exceptions where they weren't able to reconcile automatically, so assigning a write back to saying, yes, these are matched, but there are differences because of X, Y, and Z, you can do that with the write back. But also, taking that a step further to other operational use cases, middle and shadow IT operations have actually used our write back as a tactical master data mapping solution. So, where clients keep a lot of their product and their client information in spreadsheets, they'll say, okay, product is this in one system, it's called this in another system, but we know we call it this in this system. You can use the write back to say, okay, listen, let's update the mapping here so that all of the systems are actually speaking to a singular product. So getting rid of mapping tables, getting rid of Excel spreadsheets, that's the common theme where we've sort of seen a lot of value and a lot of uptake of our extension.
Okay, got it. Yeah, sorry I disappeared. My internet thought that it would be fun if we just make me disappear for a second and pop me back on screen. So hopefully that entertained people. There was a question which also disappeared from my screen, but Susan Walsh was asking about how data quality plays into the writeback extension, right? Should we be worried about potentially having people type something in and write this back to the database, or are there controls in place to prevent data quality issues?
Yep, that's very, very, very valid question. So, I mean, in our extension, there is a level of validation. So, I mean, you can capture some comments that are guardrailed through using specific filters. But yes, you won't get rid of all of that risk independently. I think where we try to mitigate the risk is we're saying, listen, with this writeback extension, you're writing back to a unique data source. You're not updating the original data source. So if your original data source is that CRM system or that ERP system, we are not really updating that transactions in those records. We're creating an alternate data source that links to those individual transactions so that it can be updated in the future. That doesn't take the risk of a fat finger trade or mistype out of the equation, but it does allow you to update it. And with us keeping it in a robust data source, we've got a full audit trail. So when people change price assumptions or they make any changes, we can see, okay, there's been 5 edits to the specific records. It was amended at this point and this point, and we can see the final value is this, and it was input by this user. So you can't eliminate it completely. First level of validation tries to minimize it, but we're not updating the source record. So that's very important to understand.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, we have a question here from Matthew asking, so it acts like a view temp table. Is that accurate?
Correct. So it acts almost as a master adjustments data source. Okay. So what we're saying is we take that original transaction, and then we're appending or adding information related to that transaction, but we're not physically changing that core transaction that changed. We're updating some of the assumption of values of that, which in turn can be used in analytics as the final value. But yeah, in short, yes, temp, but it's a robust adjustments data source, and it should be viewed that way.
Okay.
And I would just also add, if I may, is also one thing again that is important to realize is we are inside of a BI tool, so it's supposed to basically to show the reporting, all that information. All these write back capabilities is an add-on of what we can do. So, and what I'm trying to say is, if sometimes you really need to change your source data, that means that you might have an issue in your source application. So in that means you should fix that in your source, not actually with the BI tool. Because let's say in the future, if for some reason your company needs to change to a different BI tool or something like that, you are not eliminating the problem. That because it means that you will need to redevelop that feature again in that new place. So that's why this will be always a complement. Of course, we need, but it will be in a separate table. It will be in a separate table that will complement actually the data that is coming from the source, and then basically display it as is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. There is a follow-up question here from Matthew asking how the extension affects processing speed of, I guess, Qlik Sense in this case, and memory footprint. Not sure if you guys got the data on this or if you've looked into processing speed, but just thought I'd pass this along.
Yeah. Gonzalo, it's probably one for you just to talk about the API, what volume of information gets passed through that, just touch on the architecture, so we can get a bit more transparent.
Yeah, so in that part, in terms of processing, so the way the extension works is basically we have a front end that is the first in Qlik Sense. And that part, what we are just doing is basically showing the numbers and basically have the input fields that the user can basically drop downs, input, and other options. And then basically what happens is our extension will basically communicate to a backend server that we basically install in the customer environment that basically does the heavy lifting. And then after that part that he basically stores in the database, then it's all about Qlik. So Qlik will basically access that database and do what we call in the Qlik world a partial reload. So it will load only the data that we are actually changing. So, and that means that basically, let's say your update will be literally in real time, because we are just updating that information that we actually need. In terms of processing speed, in terms of the tool, is actually quite fast because, again, we are going against databases that they don't have like millions of rows, and we have a proper architecture. Like Fred said, we have a table that will have your last record and a table that will store all your information. So at the end, we are basically just going to one place to place that information. So it will be much, much faster in terms of basically the processing. In terms of memory footprint, actually not change, because in reality, the footprint that we have is basically the fields that we are bringing to Qlik. Of course, if we are talking about a field that is a comment, for instance, your footprint inside of Qlik Sense application will increase based on the comment that you are applying to that field. But again, it shouldn't change a lot, because we are not creating like new records or well, we might be creating actually, but we are not like creating bulk records like 1 million rows or something like that. It's more updating some fields or creating 1 or 2 rows because we need to add an extra data or something like that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thanks a lot for that explanation. I think at this point, I want to ask, let's say I'm a company, I'm listening to this live stream right now. I think this is awesome, and I haven't even seen the demo yet, right? But I want to use this extension. How do I go about actually getting the extension? How long does it take me to start utilizing this with my Qlik Sense dashboards or applications? I guess that's how Qlik calls them.
So in that case, at the moment, the only way you can have a trial is basically you need to contact us, and we are more than willing to basically to provide you all the support doing the installation and basically play around with everything without any limitations. Now, in terms of how long it takes to do the installation, that is always a funny question in terms of it depends. So the installation can be actually very fast. If, for instance, the customer already checked our checklist that we send before our meeting, let's say. So we have a proper checklist that the customer needs to follow to have, let's say, certification, have this, to have that. If that checklist is already in place, it should be not more than 20 minutes and we have everything up and running. Of course, if the checklist is not in place, we will probably need to check one at a time and see what is missing, what is not missing. But yeah, 20, 30 minutes tops. Everything should be already in place.
Oh, 20, 30 minutes? I thought that 20, 30 days. Jeez, that's really fast.
No.
We're living in the future now. I love it. Awesome. So Craig says awesome. Not sure to which part, but Craig's excited. Thank you for being here, Craig. We are taking questions, so if you have questions, definitely go ahead and put them in the chat, and we're going to address as many as possible. But at this point, Goncalo, I think it would be great for us to show people the demo and let them actually see how this works for themselves. And, again, jump in and ask questions as you're giving the demo. So if you'd like to pull that up, we can go ahead and do that. All right.
If you all can see my screen.
I see the screen now. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just refresh this. So this is just, I'm going to show a couple of examples of what we've been talking about. So at the end, main idea of the writeback is to try to keep the user inside of this platform instead of needing to go to an Excel or to go to somewhere else in terms of to create their data or to create their records. So this is a very quick example in terms of, let's say, if I go here, again, we have all our data, our transactions, and we have our potential customers, gross amount, how much is the contracted discount, and then we have all these columns here. Basically, all these columns are basically the fields that we might or that we want to change, we want to update. So this is coming from my source, so from my transactional system, for instance. All of this is my add-ons, okay? So this is all the data that we have in this example. And now we have this part here that, like Fred said in the example, our extension is basically pop-up driven. So it's basically, we have this button here that will trigger our extension. And the whole idea here is basically, let's say we select this record here, just a normal thing in terms of the table. We click here, it will basically pop up the information that we can see on the background. And then we see all the fields that we can or not update depending on what we actually need. So in this case, the idea would be basically just select a product type, saying the actual discount that we are going to offer to the customer. Let's say, actually the max is 20%, but let's say we give him 35%. We can add some kind of comments as an example. And then let's say the status, we can say approve, on hold. So at the moment, let's say on hold. So, and then we have here the save button that we are going to click. It will trigger all that process that I discussed. I will get the information saying that everything was done. And as you can see now, this is already my information. So basically, as soon as we store in the database, Qlik will basically trigger what we call the partial reload, and automatically will give to the user, this is your update. So that means even if I go here again, so I see now my new information. And then if I change this to approval and click save again, I will see immediately my change. So again, this is reloading the information in real time. And this is all the idea in terms of the interaction that we want the user to have with this application. So it's almost like instead of having an Excel where we need to go and start applying all the changes, we can actually have a full application like this, where we basically apply the changes that we need. And then, since this is stored in a database, nothing will stop the organization to use that database as a source to all the other systems for some reason. And it doesn't mean that it needs to be a reporting system, it can be something else. So, and then we have different options in terms of how we can basically change or comment or the different options. But one of the things that is very important when we have a writeback, and this is the part that I want to show, is we need to have an historical information. So it's very important for us to know who is actually making the changes and what kind of changes we are making. So that's why I just selected this transaction as an example. And then if I go to the next page, so the next page here, we can see basically the full story of all the changes. So we know when it was actually changed and what kind of change it was made and by whom. So we can definitely see all the information about in terms of who is actually doing all these changes. And this is actually a very critical aspect in terms of, okay, I want to do a writeback. Let's see an example that we are basically creating budgets. One of the things that we see that is very common is basically doing the budgets in an Excel. So, and perhaps we want to know who actually changed this number or the other number. So this is actually very powerful because it will basically show you basically who's been changing, who's been using this information. So then just to give a very quick example, so let's select some of them that don't have anything. So again, this is just an example of what we can have, but then just to give in terms of how it works, this is, let's say, the settings page. So here is basically where we are going to prepare the information. So what kind of edit we want, some validations if this type of edit is only a text or only a numeric, if it is a Dropbox, if it is a checkbox. And then, of course, we also have other options in terms of this field needs to be mandatory. So when you are doing an update, you need to do something in this field, like in the status or something else. We can allow or not allow bulk changes, or we can basically say, okay, this field here in reality is not editable. It's just here just for context, nothing more, nothing less. So we have all these options that we can basically play around and also basically use. One of the things that I can show that is always important. So again, we don't want the users to basically to change this one by one. So the idea here, so it's, let's say we have three options. We go here, this will pop up our three selections. We can go here to the bulk edit and we can start saying, okay, dry goods, and all of them will be 50%. And then let's say all of them will be on hold. So we can basically change everything. And then, of course, let's say just change this one for the sake of the test. Click Save. Again, start the process in terms of storing, and automatically will give us the information to the user. This was what you actually saved. So this is just a quick example in terms of what we can actually do with the writeback. Now, very useful use cases. Let me just bring another. And these are one of the main ones used by our customers. So it's basically master data management. So mapping tables, everything around master data. So one of the things that are actually a big worries in our BI tools And just one note, I'm actually talking a lot, so if we have any questions, feel free to stop me.
We do have a couple of the top, but go ahead and finish the thought on master data management.
Okay. So in this case, again, this is basically supposed to be an application that will handle all the master data or the mapping tables that we have in, let's say, in our Qlik Sense environment. So based on my experience, in all Qlik Sense environments, we will always have Excels to complement the data that we have. It's because someone needs to create a specific grouping, or because someone needs to create, let's say, different regions in terms of connected to the countries, or some kind of other master data, some groups because of the products that they want to categorize with a different way. So we all have those Excels. One of the things that we want to do is bring the users to manage those Excels, or in this case, that data, into the application. So one very common use case we have is when we are actually looking to our data. So usually, sometimes we have a data in our CRM, and then we have in a different place like SAP or some kind of other system that we have the exact same account, but different IDs. But we don't have a way of actually matching those IDs, or we don't have a way of creating that match. So in here, the idea, just as an example, is, for instance, when we click here, so let's say we select this option, and we say the ID 171 is basically linked to this CRM account and this SAP account, okay? And the idea here is basically I'm managing my master data. So I'm actually confirming this is correct. So this is actually supposed to be a confirmed match. So I can click here, say yes, and say, okay, I approve. Click save again, same process, we'll store the information, we'll do. But the important thing is now in my database where we are storing this master data, now I have a unique ID that allows me to connect my CRM code with my SAP code. So we don't need to create like crazy logic around names or around something else. We are basically mastering our master data, saying this is the match, and now this is the ID, and we can use whatever we want in our BI tool or in some kind of other system that we have. It can leverage this matching that we are basically doing. Just
okay. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. We had a question here from Koja asking, can we change the values by other things than relative frequency?
Sorry, say again?
The question is, can we change the values by other things than relative frequency? So I guess what kind of writeback, what are the types of writeback can you do?
In terms of the different types of changes we have, different types of updates we can do.
Yes. So we saw a couple of drop downs, right, where we can change the status, approve or don't approve. Can we type that in numbers or other factors?
Yeah. So if we go to our settings page, so these are all the type of edits we can do. So if I click here, so we have all these types. A Dropbox is basically a custom list that you create. So you create your own options. Basically, you can create how many you want, but at the end is a custom one. So then we have the filter pane. So filter pane is literally like a Dropbox, but the difference is the values that we will be displaying is based on a field that exists in the data model of Qlik Sense. So we will be displaying you the values that we have here in the Qlik Sense. So let's say if you select, for instance, an example, if we choose this field, I will be showing you the category fields in here. Then we have the normal input box. And in this input box, we can basically have a specific filter in terms of, are we typing a text? Are we typing an alphanumeric, or are we typing actually a numeric? So we will basically allow you, if I select only numeric, we will be only allow you to actually to type numeric.
Okay. And yeah, Coach is giving a bit more clarification. So he's thinking of using the extension in the budget negotiation process to see the impact of each decision. Not sure if you guys have faced this type of use case before.
Okay, so in that case, it's almost like creating like some kind of workflow in terms of I enter some numbers and then goes to someone else to do the approval or something like that. Probably, is that what we are talking about? If it's that in terms of to have some kind of workflow in terms of the use case, we don't have, let's say, an official workflow, but we have an option that you can configure with for your specific users. That is what we call the restricted. So in some case, let's say you are adding the information that you need, but this user is not allowed to, let's say, to change the status. It's not allowed to change to the status, let's say, approved or on hold or pending. So what will happen is one of the users, for instance, in this case, will not see this field, but then his manager will be able to basically say, okay, I approve your change, or I basically reject your change, so do something else. So we can create some kind of workflow in that way. Does that?
Okay, yeah, I think that's very helpful.
Gonzalo, sorry, just another on that point. I think as soon as data is captured in this extension, it is available to be interacted with other numbers. So in that first example that you showed, we gave a discount of 10%. Once that value is entered, in the Qlik table that information showed, you can now use that in a calculation. So if someone wanted to do scenario analysis, saying, okay, I wanted to see what the price change impact would be, the user would input those scenarios, and then that values would be saved. And then in your Qlik interface, you'll say, okay, final value equals original value times input value equals this value. So that's the concept of incorporating the input numbers, so that you can simulate those budget negotiations, and then associated with the workflow that Gonzalo mentioned around only certain users having the ability to approve certain data points. That's how you can manufacture that with our extension.
And one of the things that we also is important to understand is, as soon as we click the save button and we trigger the process, the last step of the process is to do a reload of the app. And basically what will happen is that data will be available to everyone that is accessing the app. So it's not just myself that I'm actually changing the information here. As soon as I click save, is the application itself that is refreshing the data model and refreshing the data. So this information in terms of real-time refresh is to all the users that are actually using this application. So that's why, just to give you an example, so we have here 201 CRM accounts, 189 unconfirmed. So if we select here to do just a normal, very quick example, in this case, if we bring the extension and say, okay, we confirm and this is approved, we will see that this number will update to 0, and all the other users are seeing exactly the same thing. So in that case, all the other users will see this number changing to 188. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So this is the kind of interaction that we will have with the application, and in reality that we are having in real time. So that's why any user that is in this app will see basically that action and that reaction in real time in terms of changing. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very powerful, very useful. We have another question here from Matthew saying he had a lot of trouble with hierarchical information, and how well does your extension work with that?
With hierarchical information?
Yes, hierarchical information. I have trouble saying that word clearly. But basically anything that has a hierarchy, right? It's like a category has a subcategory, has products. And I guess if you need to edit something within a hierarchy, have you guys had any complications, or does the extension work well with that?
So one of the things that we also need to realize is our extension, what will do it will be basically, it will mimicking, or in this case, will showing the data that you have in your Qlik Sense environment. So some of the work that will need to be done, it will be always done in your Qlik Sense application. Because at the end, what the extension is doing is basically displaying that information to you. So some work, it will need to be done on the Qlik Sense side. So it's basically, if you deal correctly with that hierarchy data in your Qlik Sense data model, then the extension will basically display it as is. So at the end, is the writeback is basically displaying the information that the Qlik is basically giving us. The only extra is basically allowing us to change that data. So that means, let's say, if we change, let's say one of the fields is basically to change the hierarchy level, where that place or person is sit in the hierarchy, we can change it. And when we then reload the application, again, it's all about your data model that you have in your Qlik Sense application that will recreate that hierarchy. Okay? So one of the things that we need to realize, and actually going back a little bit to the question that they were asking about the processing, we will not going to do in the writeback like all that processing logic around how to handle the hierarchies, how to move the data from one side to another. No, what we are doing in terms of the writebacks or any actually product in the market is doing is displaying the data in your data model in your Qlik Sense application, and then allow you to change it to something else. And then when you trigger the reload, or in this case the save, and then it reloads the data, it will be displayed in a different way because you basically just updated the record or something else.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I think another way of explaining that for terms that's probably better to my understanding. If you're currently leveraging the existing hierarchy, okay, and then when you overlay the writeback, you can update that hierarchy, and then when you trigger the reload, what you see in your analytics environment is that new hierarchy. But with those transactions saved, that still needs to be updated in that master record where those hierarchies defined. But you know what that looks like now. You've updated to what it needs to be, and that you can then select on, okay, what has been selected as an output to what needs to change in those source systems. So you've got a very finite list of action items that need to be executed.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. We actually have another question here. So is there a solution to store the change automatically in a CSV table?
A CSV, at the moment, no. Next year, yes. So at the moment, our backend server, basically it will store in Postgres, SQL database, or in an Oracle database. One of the things that will be ready for next year that we are basically working a lot on that is we are basically going to create what we call, of course, a freemium version that it will basically allow us users to use only the front-end piece, so without the backend, and that will be basically storing all the information into an Excel or an XML or a JSON file. So, and then, of course, if you have the backend as well, you will still be able to use all those options. One of the things that I would like also in terms of to highlight in terms of the performance, one of the things that we've been doing lately is basically actually doing a lot of rework in our writeback extension. So we are basically changing a little bit in terms of how does it works and basically how it's going to be our future. So in one of the things that we can see here in terms of these are the settings, in terms of some of the configurations we need to do. This is our section in terms of the user management. Who can use it, who has a license, who doesn't have a license. So we are making this product much, much easier to use and much, much user-friendly to the user. And one of the first things we did now that is actually ready to be available to our customers is basically we created what we call, and in the Qlik Sense world, everyone knows the name in terms of our own QMC. So basically, this will be basically a console manager that will basically allow you to manage everything, the user access and all the configurations that we have. So let me just show you this part as well. So basically what we will have, we will do the login and we will have the first initial page. Again, this should be, of course, only for admin users, not all the users. So in here, we will basically see the information in terms of the license, how many users we have, how many licenses we still have to access. In this case, we have unlimited in this license. When it actually expires this license, again, in this case, it's actually unlimited. This license is configured to how many users, not users, sorry, to how many servers. And in this case, what is actually the information of the exact server where we are. And of course, what are the database where we are connecting, and then the information around the users who actually has access to this writeback. And then, of course, when we go to the user management, we have the full place in terms of how we can manage this information. For instance, add the user, we have all the directories here in terms of that are connected to Qlik Sense, where we can add users. And again, I can start typing, for instance, my name. I see that I'm here. It will filter automatically my user directory. And then, of course, I can say, okay, this user is going to be an admin or is going to be a user. So basically, this part will give them the options, or he can set up some settings, or he will just be just a normal user to basically to use in terms of the data update. So
Gonzalo, so if Active Directory is set up in Qlik, we'll be able to see it.
Correct. So this here, so yep. One thing that we need to understand is our writeback is basically connected to Qlik Sense. So all the users that will have access to this writeback is basically all the users that exist in Qlik Sense. Nevertheless, we have an option in Qlik Sense that is basically using the capacity license. That is basically can be one user that is actually not that is not known by the environment, and they will, well, with a specific configuration, they will also be able to use the extension. So basically, this extension will work with any type of license you have in your environment, professional, analyzer, and capacity analyzer. So in that case, we will not have any issues.
Yeah, I think that was important to clarify. Thank you, Gonzalo. There is a question here that I was also wondering. So what happens if a comment is to be updated in an aggregate table, right? You make an adjustment in an aggregate table. Does it propagate to granular transactions table? So if we made an update at the category level, will the comment propagate to the subcategory level as well?
So that is the part in terms of how do you actually have the setup. So let me actually bring the other example again. So let's say if I bring this example in terms of that we were seeing, one of the things that we need to remember is, since this is creating the data to a different place, so to a different data table, so we need to make sure we are able to connect those dots. So in this case, what we have always is we have, let's say, the transaction ID in our source, and we will need to have the transaction ID in our writeback table. And this transaction ID will allow us to connect the dots between the two different sources. So at the end, we need to have something that tells us how can I connect the data that is coming from my source to the one that I'm actually generating or updating with my writeback. So in that case, yes, it would be possible to do with that in terms of having. We just need to have an ID basically that allows us to identify. That ID can be a category ID or it can be a transaction ID.
Yep.
It depends on how you want to show the data in your system at the end.
It depends on where we define the level of granularity. So in Gonzalo's example, it's at the lowest level of granularity, which is transaction ID, but you might want to elect to do that at a high level, and then you'll update it at that level. But the user needs to set that up, define it, and then you can update at the granular or the aggregated level.
Yeah, because at the end here, as an example, we are doing the changes on transaction level. So we need to know what is actually that ID of that transaction to be able to connect these dots.
Yeah, absolutely. Very helpful. Gonzalo, anything else you want to show on the demo side of things?
In terms of the writeback, one of the things that I would like also to show is a little bit in terms of the different options we have. Again, this was just a very quick example of what we have, but in terms of, we have much more options in terms of that you can enable or disable. And one of the things that are that is actually very powerful is actually the calculation condition for our button. So in this case, in reality, what we can actually say as an example, we can actually create calculations conditions, in this case, as an example, saying this button will just show up if we have 2 or less, or in this case, 1 or 2 transactions selected. And this can actually be very powerful for some use cases, in this case, where we can basically restrict the button to pop up to specific users. So usually some customers of ours actually use this conditional together with the section access to make sure this button, for instance, only shows up to a specific user or to a specific region. So this is the kind of combinations we can actually do, and it will actually work in terms of restrict even more the access, or just making sure, okay, this user can only update the data on these conditions. And then we have other options as well, but these are more in terms of, let's say, statics, like the icons, the different type of icons that we can have, the different type where we can actually position the button. In this case, the labels, again, the labels are also functions, so we can interact with your data. So that part is also possible. And then we have all other parts in terms of if you want to update the success message. For instance, this is very useful for some customers of ours, OEM customers, that they have, for instance, a possibility to give their customers to create, let's say, comments in the data. And then when they do the comment, actually they get a personalized message saying, "Hi, John, thank you very much for your comment," something like that. So you can actually work around and basically adapt to your use case that you have in front of you.
Yeah, I think that condition is very valuable when it speaks to workflow. So in the example where Gonzalo updated a few assumptions around price changes, when you click save, those changes might be in the data source, but they might not be approved. So what you could create is a super user will log in, they'll say, "Hi, John, please approve these 3 transactions." And when that person approves it, it's actually saved as the final source.
I think at the end, one of the things that is very important to understand is this writeback is inside of Qlik. So that means you can leverage everything that you have in Qlik in terms of the data, the expressions, the set analysis to create those calculations conditions. So, and that will basically trigger options like to create customized workflows or to create customized conditions in terms of when the button should pop up or not pop up. So these are the kind of powerful options we will have to basically to interact with our system. Or we can have a very basic option like we were seeing in the when we are basically working with mapping tables. That is just basically showing the table, update here, and that's it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. That was really helpful. I know you started talking about kind of some of the future developments that we can see in the next year, but is there anything else you want to add to that? What can we expect in 2 weeks, 2021? What are you guys going to be working on?
Yeah, so we are actually working a lot on this, doing a completely redesign, because one of the things we have is when we actually start building, like Fred said to that user, we created in a very specific way. So it was very tailored to that customer. And one of the things that we are doing is basically redesigning all the extension in terms of to improve the performance, to improve basically the user interaction. So that's why we created the QMC, and basically we will start moving everything that is around configurations to that QMC. For instance, we already have the user management. All the settings will be there, so to make sure only the admins can actually see and have access. Since we will need to generate tables to store the data, those generations of or creations of the tables will be available through the QMC. Another thing that will be very useful to everyone is basically the CSV or XML format, and together with the freemium version. So instead of you having the need to install the backend server in your environment, you can just use the front end and basically try out with the freemium version. And then we have other ideas that we are working, but most importantly is also we work a lot together with the customers, and some of the features, or the majority of the features in reality, are all customer driven. So because they now have a new use cases, we need this, we need that, can we have it, or how can we actually have it? Sometimes actually what we have, it answers the questions. Other times it's okay, give us a week, give us 2 weeks, and we will develop that feature. It's all about the customer need at the end.
Yeah, and the performance improvements that Gonzalo speaks to, it's very focused around user experience, making sure that that pop-up generates within 3 seconds, making sure that the error messages pop up and the users manage through that experience. That's very important for us because we are seeing a lot more OEM type use cases where the writeback is used as web mashups, scaling out to 500 or more users. So making sure that experience is consistent is a function of continuous improvement for us. So, I mean, that's always top of mind. And we're also extending the integratability of the extension with other products. So a lot more news to come in the new year. But yeah, it's a function also of business as usual, just making sure that user experience is as crisp as possible. And that's always the forefront of our development.
Awesome. It seems like we've got a lot to look forward to, and you guys have a lot of work ahead of you to make all of that happen. So exciting times. I know we're wrapping up and we're at the end of our session, but before we go, I definitely want to thank the live audience for joining us. I want to thank you guys. You always bring really interesting content onto the show. I want to encourage everyone who's tuning in and listening right now to go ahead and follow the Pomerol Partners page on LinkedIn. They're always putting out great content there. But as we wrap up, where can people go to continue the conversation, or if they want to learn more about Pomerol Partners?
So our website will be the first point of stop. So we've got a website with some intro videos, explainer videos. We've got that split between a business user and a technical user, just to introduce the concept and actually how it works. That's also backed up by a knowledge repository at writeback.pomerolpartners.com. So we've got more details there in terms of the use cases, specific videos, installation guides. There's a lot of detail there. But yeah, we'd like to hear from people in the first instance, because every writeback is unique. Every Qlik Sense implementation is unique, and this is a product that's plug and play to a degree, but you're plugging and playing it to a unique solution. So there's always that type of consultative/advisory approach that we engage with when we speak to prospects and clients to make sure that it fits their specific use case. But yeah, it starts with a conversation with ourselves.
And I would also add as well our YouTube page. We have several videos there, and even our old webinars where people can basically understand the technicality of the writeback and the business side of the writeback in terms of how everything works. Is also a very good place to actually to see more about the writeback.
Yeah, especially when it's questions around the architecture. So the webinar we did earlier in the year that Scott Dathey presented was very detailed in terms of how the architecture flows in with existing data sources, new data sources, how the different tables are created in your target data source. Highly encourage people who are interested from a technical perspective and how it works to look at that. But yeah, if not, please give myself or Gonzalo a shot, and we're happy to support.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. So PomerolPartners.com, their YouTube channel, their LinkedIn, their Twitter, they're everywhere. Check them out. And thank you again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you
very much, guys.
Have a good one.